Up. Welcome to another design cast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Bycer, and we are doing the second episode of our series looking at the motivation systems or gameplay loops of popular titles. Joining me for this discussion is a creative director on the upcoming game Revn, Silas. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Josh.
It's great to have you back on.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Alright, so for those of you who missed part one that we did last month, this is a topic Silas suggested as kind of an ongoing series, as we're going to be trying to break down the motivation systems or the progression curves of popular games and see what we can learn about how these games continue to attract or keep people invested in playing. And we're going to be taking a look this week specifically. We're going to be trying to cover the games Warframe, Hades, and Revn. And of course, Revn again is the game Silas is currently working on. So I'm sure he's got a lot in terms of his insight and research he's been doing on that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into that one. This whole thought experiment that we're doing is actually something that, like, I did at the very beginning of
Mm-hmm.
development on Revn. This was one of the first things I did when I was just, coming up with the idea for the game. I was like, okay, how does this game work on a fundamental level?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to play it? Why do I want to play it? And I'm really excited now to kind of go back and look at that and sort of see, like what you think the perspective, like what you think the motivations might be as someone who didn't design it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then kind of see how that matches up with my own perspectives. Unfortunately, I was not able to find my original document because I did fill out a chart 4 years ago. I can't find it. It's probably gone to the void of the internet somewhere. Um, Old laptop hard drive somewhere. But I am excited to sort of dig into that and see what you think and compare notes on that. And I'm also really excited to talk about Warframe and Hades because they're very different games. Hades is a single player indie game. Warframe is also an indie game. So we got a lot of indie games tonight. I think all three
Mm-hmm.
games we're talking about are considered indie games. Whereas last week was some indie games and some AAA stuff. Or last month. Um, feels like only a week ago.
Yeah,
So
I know the feeling.
yeah,
Alright, so if you want to get the chart up, I know we had that little chart system.
yeah. Let me see if I can do that again.
And while you're doing that, let's see if we can decide which game to talk about first. So,
All
if we
right.
go by date wise, Warframe is probably the oldest of the three.
Yes, I do believe Warframe's going on 7 years now. They got their 7 year anniversary going on this month, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, let's start with Warframe because it'll be the oldest, and Hades came out 2018, I think. So it's about a year old.
Yeah.
It's been in early access for a year,
Mm-hmm.
and then um, you know, Revn isn't out yet, so we're minus 1 years old or something.
Alright. So,
Uh,
we'll start with Warframe then. So,
all right, yeah.
I guess what quadrant do you think we should deal with? And for people new watching, what are they looking at on your screen?
So what we're looking at here is a mental exercise that was talked about in a GDC talk a couple years ago of
Mm-hmm.
looking at the reasons that players enjoy playing different types of games. Um, what part of their psychology is it engaging with, right? Is it
Mm-hmm.
exploring new things? Do they enjoy a challenge? Do they like, socializing with other people? So we're sort of looking at what are the parts of the game that appeal to those different types of people, and then how strongly does it appeal? Is it like it's just there, or is it like really important to the game's fundamental design?
Mm-hmm.
So it's less about it is about execution, but I think it's also about what was the intent when you're designing the game, and the overall, like, at the core of the game, whether or not they executed on it, was this like an important thing to them, and also looking at how they executed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for Warframe, I think I mean we've always been starting in the left corner, like working our way
Mm-hmm.
across, but we could do it totally different if we wanted to.
Yeah.
I guess why don't we do it backwards this time? Let's start in the the stimulation quadrant and talk about, is it a multiplayer game versus is it a single player game?
Okay.
And I think, that's something that we could say about the game right off the bat is that it's a multiplayer game. It's an MMO.
Mm-hmm.
So it has that going for it right off the bat. And you also have, is it a single player experience? It is. It absolutely is a game that you can play
Mm-hmm.
entirely by yourself. You can play Warframe. I believe you can pretty much play the entire game without really interacting with another human being. There's like very little content that you cannot play just by yourself. In fact, that's how I played the game for the first 100 hours. I didn't play with other people. I just ran the same mission over and over again. Uh, so I would argue that so sort of the way this graph works is you've got, does it have it, is it good, and is it like best, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that Warframe has like the good component in both multiplayer and single player. Like it's good on its own and it's good with multiplayer.
Yeah. Now, I would say that maybe multiplayer would be a little bit more of a focus. So I know they've been doing a lot more with guilds. One of my regulars, El Gordo, he has a oh god, mirror there. Has been doing like, they have like spaceship now. You can have like different people piloting the spaceship or doing functions in the
Yeah.
spaceship.
Yeah, and having said that, I have to agree with you. Like maybe it is a more multiplayer focused game,
Mm-hmm.
but it also does have the possibility to play single player. So yeah, I guess that way it appeals to multiplayer, but it does allow for some single player.
Yeah.
And on the thrill versus calm spectrum, um, how thrilling is Warframe? Is it an action game? You do backflips and
Yeah.
have all these cool abilities. Like, yeah, I mean, this game has tons of thrills, right?
Yeah.
It's great when it comes to thrills. I would honestly say that like it's got tons of it. It's really good action.
Mm-hmm.
And calm aspect of the game. You've got, you don't have a lot there. Like it's pretty fast paced. From
Yeah. You
you've
have
got
your.
it has calm moments. There's like the fishing mini game. You can fish. I don't think there's like too much else you can do. There's a couple of like side activities, but the core of the game is thrill based.
Yeah.
So I guess let's talk about one of the other quadrants uh, that is pretty important to Warframe is this blue quadrant,
Mm-hmm.
the challenge quadrant.
Yeah.
And there's work versus not work, which is all about, does the game have grinding? Do you
Yeah.
have to grind in Warframe?
Yeah. You have to do a lot of
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. It's a looter shooter, right? You
Mm-hmm.
are and I would dare put the whole three quadrants, and say that
Mm-hmm.
Warframe has some of the best in class looting, shooting, grinding experience in an MMO that I've played. I don't know if you would agree with me on that or not.
Yeah. I haven't played, I think, long enough, or I haven't played recently to really say yes or no. But it definitely has a lot of systems related to grinding, relating to progression, power, things like that.
Yeah, I would argue that Warframe has like its grinding is a very very important part of the game, right? And so they want to do it as best as possible. Because this is a tool that you can, when you're a game developer, you can use this tool to look at, well, how well did another game achieve these goals, but also think about, if you're designing a game, is this important to us to prioritize, right? Do we put
Mm-hmm.
time and money into making this good? Do we hire more people to work on this, right? And I would say, for a game like Warframe, you want to have the best grinding experience possible. I mean, just look at a game like, I don't want to trash talk other games, but you have a lot of other looter shooters that have come out. Some of them have been really big, and the loot experience has been suboptimal. That's like one of the really biggest complaints you can give about some of these other games.
Yeah.
Um, is, like there's nothing dropping that's worth grinding for, or it's just abysmally hard to grind for things. That's super important to nail in this type of game.
Yeah, if you're doing the whole procedurally generated loot system, there has to be something meaningful to go after.
Right.
And this was one of the problems I ran into with stuff like with Borderlands. That it always felt like no matter what loot was being dropped, it eventually got to a point where you needed X, Y, and Z to drop, or you're not
Mhm.
making any progress. The whole 30 minutes, an hour long, whatever, is just useless.
Right, right. Um, so then let's talk about like the not work aspect. You know, how can you bypass the grinding in Warframe? Is that possible? If you're a player who doesn't have a lot of time, you know, you're a busy
Mm-hmm.
worker. You know, you have you're working, you're raising a kid, you're a parent, right? And you still want to play Warframe. Is that possible? And I would say yeah,
Oh,
because
yes.
you can buy stuff to skip most of the timers, and like whether or not these microtransactions are ethical, you can do it, and I would actually say that they have pretty ethical microtransactions.
Yeah.
Um, and like it's possible to play the game without doing a ton of grinding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can play
Uh,
the game without spending money, or you can spend a lot of money, and a lot of that stuff is just going to be given to you for free. But
yeah,
it still feels like I think a lot of people would argue it's probably one of the fairest in terms of its monetization.
right, right. And I think honestly, like when I bought stuff in Warframe, I felt like I was cheating myself. Like when I bought cosmetic stuff, I felt good. I don't know, I've probably spent somewhere between $50 and $100 on Warframe at this point. It's been like 4 years. I like every year I'll spend like $25 or something. Like they'll give you a discount and be like, hey, it's 50% off on the premium currency, so I'll spend like $25, you know, because I've been playing for a year without giving them any money. Uh, so like when I buy the cosmetic stuff, you know, it's like okay, I look cool, that's awesome. When I buy stuff though, that's gameplay in the game, like when I buy, you know, their characters, the Warframes, and I buy new characters and weapons and stuff, I honestly feel like I'm cheating myself out of the content that I could have like played through to unlock it in game by like completing certain quests and things like that. Because that's really what you're doing, especially with the new stuff they've added. It feels like, you know, hey, you could do this quest, and then you get the cool thing, or you can just buy it, right? If you don't have time to do that. And I was buying the new stuff as it came out. I was like, oh, that looks cool. I'll buy it. And then I would go and do the quest. I'd be like, you know, I could have just played through this, you know. So they're very ethical microtransactions.
Yeah. It's
Um,
I would say it's very similar in some sense with Monster Hunter, and that sense that if you're playing the game, you know you are going to have to work to get those parts, to get those upgrades, and there's that thrill of, you know, I upgrade my weapon to the next class, or I unlock,
mhm.
you know, a new piece of armor.
Yeah. I saw East Going Zax in chat. He was saying, if I feel that way, can I really say the game's that high on the work skill? I still feel like I can say that they have best in class grinding. Like you can like the grinding is like that's why the grinding is so high. I'm not saying that it has so much grinding it's bad. I'm saying that like grinding is very important to the game that they do it correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make me want to keep playing the game because we're looking at like because if the grinding was bad in Warframe, I would not want to play it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because the grinding feels so good, I keep coming back to it. And how does skill feel in
Mm.
Warframe? Is it a game where you have to be really good at the game to enjoy it?
Uh, I don't think I don't think so. I don't think being it's not the fidelity is definitely not there as a pure action game, and it wasn't meant to be. I think a pure action game. That's where kind of like the MMO, the grinding, and the loot come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you get with a group of people who are really good at that game, you can just basically just literally just like walk away from your keyboard and you'll still get progress done. That's how it
Right.
kind of works there.
Yeah, you'll be able to play. You're absolutely right. Like that's how I played Warframe for like the first year. I had a friend who was, you know, way ahead of me, and I would just go along with him, and I didn't have to do anything. So it's definitely a game where you don't have to do a lot of work, or you don't have to be very skilled at the game. There's I guess some skill that comes into like knowing what to make, right? Or like with the crafting and the
The min
combinations of the weapons.
maxing, that kind of thing.
Right. There is a skill to that. There's
Yeah.
a skill and an art form to creating the best stuff. But it's really like it's not. I feel like a highly skilled game to play,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so I get there's some room for like there's sort of a gray area there of you know is the modding system super skilled, but like I think you also have players who you know enjoy playing without that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so looking at something else, green category. category, which is all about novelty,
Mm-hmm.
is the game a fantasy?
I think I would say it would be more on fantasy than realism side.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, it's definitely a fantasy game. You've got these biomechanical suits in space with magic
Mm-hmm.
and aliens. It's a fantasy. I think it has realism in the fact that it has swords and guns that are a thing that we have in real life that we can relate to, but it's really not about being realistic. We don't worry about bullet drop. It takes
Mm-hmm.
thousands of bullets to bring down some enemies, right? So it's not a realistic game. It has some realism. It's much more on the fantasy side.
Yeah,
And
like I would say like if we were to compare this and make something like the Division, it would basically be like the reverse with the Division.
yeah, like the Division has like one checkbox for fantasy because it's obviously got some fantastical elements to it
Mm-hmm.
and fictional elements, but it's more like two ticks in the realism factor because they tried to bring in like real world guns and real gun modifications and making things look realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're fighting in a real place. You're fighting in New York City. Um, so I guess in that way, like Warframe also has some realism in that it's based in the real solar system. You're fighting on Earth and Mars and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
Venus. But they've also taken some very large liberties
Yeah.
with, taken very very big liberties with their artistic licensing of this is what Mars looks like and what Venus looks like. If I
Mm-hmm.
remember correctly, Venus is a very hot planet, and in Warframe it's like an icy tundra. So I think there's some terraforming that happens in the lore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm a little rusty on my Warframe lore.
Mm-hmm.
So building, so like creating things in the world it's a part of Warframe. I would say it's even like a very big part because you get to build different weapons. You're
Mm-hmm.
modifying those weapons. You can customize your ship. You can customize your character. Fashion frame is super important
Oh
in
yes.
Warframe. Like I think the ability to customize, like that's what building really means in this chart to me.
Yeah.
Is can you customize? And oh my god, you can customize.
Yeah, that's high up there easily.
Yeah. I think the chances of running into another player who looks the same as you, uses the same guns, and has the same stats is probably like one in a bajillion.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh, and exploring the world, is there exploration in Warframe?
Well, they've done more with the open world aspect to it. I haven't had a chance to really like dig into it, but they've been trying to establish, I think, more of a place as opposed to just the mission by mission structure.
Right, and I think sort of like you said, it's something they've added because it's a game that's constantly in development. So in that way, you can almost say that this chart can grow a little bit as the game continues. Like
Mm-hmm.
they add new stuff to appeal to different people. So they definitely have exploration. You've got the open worlds. You can go out into space now. I think that exploration is not a like core part of
Yeah.
Warframe. It's sort of something you do once you've like fallen into the rhythm of grinding, building stuff, and going out and doing all the missions. Right. The exploration is sort of like when you're not grinding and going through all the missions, you can explore the open world, right, and learn about the game. And finally, the harmony box of is the game co-op? Is it PvP?
Mm-hmm.
How strong are the mechanics? How much lore and world building and context is in the game?
Yeah.
And do players is that why players are playing the game? You know,
Mm,
um, I think people it definitely has co-op. It's much more co-op than PvP.
yeah. There
It
are.
has PvP.
Yeah.
It's not very good according to most people.
Yeah, I
Um,
think from like the people who play it, like the ones that I know, like they rarely talk about the PvP side.
Right. I enjoy playing the PvP because I'm one of the few people who plays it, so I can be good at it and like get that little ego boost of like, oh yeah, I'm crushing all these people in PvP because there's like the same 7 people who play it every day. But that's PvP in Warframe. It just doesn't really happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's definitely got co-op, and you've got to work with other people for like some of the stuff with like your clan for like crafting certain things, but it's really not like super strong. I've never felt um, like I think if you are co-oping, you can get through challenges a lot easier, right? Like if you're
Hmm.
playing with another person, things become so much easier. You can revive each other if you go down, and all that good stuff. But it's not like say I'm trying to think of like another like game that might be more team based where you need to work as a team to like synergize your different things, like the
Probably
abilities and
like
stuff.
MMOs or like raids and systems like that, where everyone needs to be there or you're not going to win, kind of thing.
Yeah, I've never felt that way in Warframe. I've never felt like there was massive synergy required between players,
Hmm.
to pull off like taking something down. It was more like, are you working together? Great. Are you going to revive that guy? Good. You're all shooting at the same target. We're good. You know, yeah, like Overwatch. It's not like this guy has to be healing me right now or I'm going to die. You know,
Hmm.
I think that's good for this type of game where it's about gaining loot for yourself, right? It would really suck if like the entire game hinged on like one player helping everyone else. Because if they stopped helping, they go AFK. You
Hmm.
know, especially in, like a PVE game. Like there's a lot of room for that to just ruin the experience for everyone.
Yeah, and I've never been a fan of like the whole rating system in MMOs.
Mm. Yeah, and then talking about mechanics versus context, where context is lore and world building, I would say that Warframe has, especially in the last few years, put a lot of time into building lore. It's
Hmm.
not like the primary reason someone plays
Yeah.
the game, um, but it's important to them. It's very
Hmm.
important to the players because, and I'm not even going to say anything here on this podcast, but there is a very important part of Warframe lore that no one talks about. None of the players will talk about it until they know that you've played to a certain mission. Um, and I mean, if you've played Warframe for the last couple of years and you've hundreds of hours in, you know what I'm talking about. If you've gotten to the War Within, you know what I'm talking about. Like there are certain quests that you don't talk about with people because they're that cool, right? The
Hmm.
lore is that important to the players and the devs and the community. But it's not the primary reason you play the game.
Yeah.
It's not what brings you in, but it's definitely very important once you discover it.
Hmm. And again, there's the fandom around the various warframes, cosplaying, the
Mm-hmm.
fashion side. Like, there's a lot to the world beyond just playing the game.
Absolutely right. You've got TennoCon. They have an annual convention. People cosplay specific characters. They do fan art. Like the world is more than just the mechanics and the
Yeah.
numbers, right? Um, and finally, speaking of mechanics and numbers, I would say that Warframe has a lot of those, and having strong mechanics is pretty important to them.
Hmm. Yep, definitely. There's a lot again with the systems that they've added. It doesn't, like I said, like it doesn't feel as much like as skill intensive as some of the action games that we've played, but
Mhm.
there's still a lot there to kind of wrap your head around.
Right. So if you were designing Warframe, if you were a designer on Warframe, making a game at the beginning, would you say that having strong mechanics, like, is this something that's has to be good, or does it have to be like best in class to bring people in to play the game?
Uh, I think again with the focus on the microtransactions and all that kind of the in-game store, it has to be good, but I don't know if it has to be like best in class.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, and this is always sort of this is all subjective, right? About like
Hmm.
what game has the best gun mechanics and stuff, right? Like I personally think that Warframe has some really good gun and ability mechanics, and it's a fun game to move through the world and play the game. And honestly, that's like what drew me in when I first started playing it. Like the bullet jump and sliding and running on walls, I was like, this is badass, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think that can sort of it can vary from person to person whether that's what's bringing you in. It's definitely important to some people, um,
Hmm.
and I think I accidentally like gave them more co-op box than we wanted to. Just trim that up a little bit. That's not what I wanted to do. All right, so I'm super skilled with art programs, if you haven't noticed, and so this is our subjective opinion slash analysis of Warframe and why people play it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Hopefully, people in the comments can judge us harshly for our opinions and
Mm-hmm.
where we messed up. Um, and I think this is really cool to do this stuff because it tells us like, okay, this is the type of player who might enjoy this, and this type of map would look very similar to, I think, similar games like Destiny or Anthem. These are
Mm-hmm.
probably, for someone who plays those games, it looks very similar, right? They care about. We talked about the Division earlier too, right? Like they care about mechanics, they care about custom builds. They want to play in multiplayer, they want to grind, right? Like you'd see overlap in those aspects of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely falls in line with that kind of, again, like the looter shooter kind of gameplay.
Right. That was me. Sorry, I had to move something on my desk. All right. So are we ready to move on to another game, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so.
Let me just reset the screen. All right. Would we like to talk about Hades or Revn next?
If we go in order of release, we can do Hades.
All right. That sounds good. Let's do that. So Hades, if you haven't heard of it, is an indie. It's an indie game that came out in early access a year or two ago. Hey, Lucia, what's up? And it's how to describe it. Have you played it, Josh?
Oh yes,
All
definitely.
right, awesome, awesome. Maybe you can describe it.
All right, it is a action roguelike where you are trying to escape from Hades using the Greek gods to help you. The game features a lot of variance based on what gods you run into, what weapons you choose, and there's definitely an extensive amount of variance built into the game. But it still relies on the player's skill at the end of the day to make it through it.
Yeah, that's a very accurate description of the game. So just diving right into it, let's talk about the first area, the
Mm-hmm.
novelty. Uh, I would say right off the bat that Hades is a fantasy game. You're
Mm-hmm.
interacting with Greek gods, and you've got bows and arrows and swords and magic, and I mean that's
Yeah.
about as fantasy as you get. And having that fantasy, I think, is pretty important to the game. It's something they really had to nail and have like an interesting world.
Yep.
Um, Same with exploration. Like you're exploring the world. It's like I think that's like something they had to do correctly, right? They couldn't
Mm-hmm.
just have some exploration. It had to be fun to explore.
Yeah. They did spend a lot of time fleshing out the personalities of the various characters,
Right,
which
right. I think that really counts points in the context box and like that lore
okay.
sense, like right. Because like exploration is like I go out there and I discover things. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
little different. Um, there's
Eh.
not really any building or like customization in the game, is there?
You get to kind of choose how hard you want to make the game, as well as your choices in terms of like boons and abilities, but that may be more in the mechanics side. It's not really a game about. It's not really a game about like customization, the same vein as something like Warframe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like there really isn't building. You're not influencing the world. You're not changing the world
Yeah.
by going through it. There is a little bit of storytelling of changing the world. Like as you meet different characters, other characters react differently. But that's really like you're not leaving a huge permanent mark as
Yeah.
you're going through.
Mm.
And it also doesn't. It's not a very realistic game. Second
No,
of all, there's
definitely not.
almost no realism to Hades. So it's a fantasy game about exploring. Um, where does it fit into good old challenge box? Is the game hard? You have to be good at it.
Yeah, the persistent elements are designed so that eventually anyone can beat the game just by, I'm just gonna spend hours getting passive upgrades. But the better you are at the game, the quicker you're going to get through it.
Right. Yeah. So, like you said, it has built-in mechanics for just getting through the game if you're not good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So it does get like that little box in the less skilled area. but it's definitely a hard game, and I
Mm-hmm.
think you'll have the most fun if you're, learning how to play it better and better. And every run that you go through, you get
Mm-hmm.
farther through the map because you've gained knowledge about how to perform the different moves and combos.
Yeah.
Um, in that way, is the game grindy? Do you have to do the same thing over and over again?
Well, it is a roguelike, so you are meant to replay it again and again and again. There's enough variance, I think, that it doesn't feel, grindy in the sense that you're just repeating the same thing. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it's not work either. Like, if you're going to get good at this game, you're going to have to learn, figure out the patterns, what are the best things to go for, things like that.
Mhm. So maybe in that way it gets like two boxes in the work area because like you're doing the same thing over and over again. But it's also interesting because it's a roguelike, so it's different every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you are doing you have to do the same thing. There's almost it's like next to impossible. I feel like to get through the game without dying, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the entire reveal trailer was like it ends with you dying and respawning, and you,
Mm-hmm.
you know that you're going to try again and again. So it's a game about doing the same thing over and over again, but slightly differently every time because it's roguelike and you get different loot drops and different boons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when it comes to co-op, are you working with other
Nope.
characters or players?
Not at
Nothing.
all in this one.
Yeah. Everyone there wants you dead. Just about everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Just about everyone in Hades wants you dead.
Yeah, this is a
Uh,
combat easily.
very much a combat game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, very much a combat game. It's also very much has really interesting story. That's like one of the primary reasons I play the game. I'd go so far as to say like it's a primary reason that people like play the game. I know I kept playing it
Mm-hmm.
not just because I wanted to beat the levels, but because I wanted to find out what happened in the story.
Yeah,
Um,
the backstories and the character development are really good in Hades. Despite the fact that, again, it is a roguelike, characters will comment on what you've done, or conversation will continue across runs.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's almost exclusively a combat game. The combat in it is really good. I don't know whether it's like a two or a three on our quote unquote
Mm.
3-star system.
And I
Um,
would say mechanics would be higher than combat, because there is the whole system of trying to figure out what are the best boons. There's a lot in terms of persistence, in terms of unlocking new weapons, getting more rewards, unlocking more things that can show up in the world as you get forward. Like, there's definitely a heavy focus on that persistent element, almost akin to something like the Binding of Isaac.
okay. Are we kind of happy with how we split this out? Or do you want to kind of tweak things there?
Mm, hard to tell. I don't know if I would. I guess for combat, like what would that be considered in this regard?
Um, well, 'cause it's not like thrill, right? It's are you because thrill is are you excited? And that can be a horror game where you don't have any combat
Mm-hmm.
and you're just running away. So this is sort of are you working against the world or are you working with the world? And is that why you're playing the game, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
you are you playing Hades because you know you you really like fighting back against the world and the other characters and it's executed well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, you are fighting against characters, but again, there is so much of a focus on the story and learning about what's going on with them.
mhm. Yeah, so I guess in that way, it's sort of like it has to be good. The combat has to be good,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't need to be the main reason you play because in some ways you're more interested in
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like trying the new boons or just
Yeah.
getting through. So I'm kind of happy with where that landed.
Okay.
And finally, the stimulation box um, is the game multiplayer.
Not at all.
Absolutely not. It's a purely single player game. This is a
Mm.
game you play by yourself because you like watching yourself fail. This
Mm.
is. It doesn't really have a multiplayer component. The most multiplayer you get out of it is streaming it and other people watching you
Yeah.
fail. Um, is it a calm game? Is it an exciting game?
It's calm when you're in like the hub area, but then once you actually start playing, you're not going to be relaxing in this one.
Yeah, so it's predominantly a thrill game, and it's like you said, it has calm moments, so it sort of gets that first box. It has them, but it's not about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's about the thrill of going out into the world. And is this the run where I make it all the way to the end?
Yeah. And it
Um,
gets harder and harder if you want it to be, with additional
right.
challenges and rewards like that.
Yeah. Speaking of Hades, I think there's a new update out that I haven't played yet, so I don't know what happens in the latest story. I got to go do that.
Did they release a new update to it?
I believe so. I
Now
think
I need to look this up.
the last time I played would have been like the end of 2019.
Oh, there
I
have
think
been updates since the end of 2019. I know they're
I have
working on another update. I
I
think
have
it's coming
not played
this
in
month.
2021 yet. Okay. So, well, I think I might know what I'm doing tonight. So this is sort of our analysis of Hades, and if we want to kind of compare that with Warframe, you can see they're very different games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this being Hades and this being Warframe, there's some overlap, right? In the fact that it's fantasy and that story mechanics matter, and that you have like this like single player, some calm and some thrill.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the things that they take like most seriously are very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
there's.
and Warframe is also sort of has a maybe a broader appeal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it covers more of the chart, right? More people will have the motivations, or it appeals to more motivations, so it's probably more likely that a player would be interested in it because they would fit in one of those areas. Whereas Hades is a little more niche, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Like Hades' gameplay is probably more higher stake or more mechanically driven than Warframe, but Warframe would be deeper in terms of its subsystems, the progression curve, things along those
right.
lines.
Yeah, and I think Warframe is a game as a service, right? You keep playing it, and it becomes like
Mm-hmm.
part of your. It's a lifestyle game, right? You play it every day, and you've all got all these things to work towards. Whereas Hades is sort of a. I wouldn't say Hades is a game that someone says that they made, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
game that you play until you've beaten it, and then you beat it a few more times, and you beat it until you feel like you've done everything you want to do in it, right? How many challenges do you want to complete? Do you want 100% the game? Do you want to just beat
Mm-hmm.
the story? And then I feel like it's the type of game that you just sort of set aside, right? And you say, all right, I beat Hades. I beat Hades on the third difficulty, right? And then some new content comes out, and you go through it again. You're like, all right, I beat Hades and all the new content. Warframe is like there's always something to do.
Yeah, it has the same replayability as something like Enter the Gungeon or The Binding of Isaac. How
Mm-hmm.
far can I go on this run, and what's going to surprise me or force me to adapt on the next run?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having random procedural content does allow it to be more replayable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think at that point it's sort of like, okay, how many times can you be surprised or intrigued by this random collection of things to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that also comes down to the type of player you are. Like some players might really get a kick out of like the smallest variable being different. Like, oh, I've never seen this combination of boons before.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas another person might play the game and be like, all right, that was cool. I beat the game. And they're not interested in seeing new combos of boon. So those are the different types of players, and whether or not this is a game that they would play multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, all right, I guess now it is time for the game that I would hopefully know the most about, Revn, game that I'm making. Some of you guys watching this live or recorded have probably heard me talk about Revn before, but Revn is a third-person shooter MOBA hybrid game currently in development by Project Ambitious Games, where I'm the creative director. I have a very talented team working on the game right now. We've been working on it for about 3 years, and we're really excited to be moving towards an open beta later this year, and we've got some more exciting stuff coming up we'll be talking about with Josh after the stream. Um, but having said all that, The important part was it is a third-person shooter MOBA. And that really predetermines a lot of where the game falls on this
Yeah.
chart, because there's a lot of things that every MOBA does that we do. Um, and the funny thing is that I never designed Revn to be a MOBA. I sort of worked my way backwards into that label. We started making the game with a chart like this, and having core ideas about how the game would play and why people would do things. And then I think sort of after we had filled out the chart, we sort of looked at other MOBAs and we're like, oh, we're kind of like MOBAs. So I like to say that we found our way to the MOBA genre, uh, instead of just choosing the genre and then creating things around it. But however we got there, that's where we are now. And um, Josh, you've played the game, so maybe you should fill out this chart, and then I will judge you for it.
All right. So let's start, I think, with the easiest one. That'll be the bottom right quadrant.
All right.
And I would say definitely nothing in solo play, at least not from what I played during when we did that beta play of it.
Okay.
Definitely high up. You need to have people that have any chance of winning. It's a team-based game at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would say
Two or three boxes. How generous are you feeling?
I would say for right now 2 boxes because I didn't get to see like the persistent elements of it and what's
Okay.
going to kind of move people or motivate them to return to the game and get invested in it. Hey, Elgato, you missed it. We completely butchered Warframe for our first part. We said how horrible the game it was. You shouldn't play it. Things like that. Let's see. Calm. I think this depends on the kind of person. Like again, like for me, team-based games, MOBAs, Counter Strike, those are always very stressful, very thrilling. So, uh, for me, I would say, well, it's not like action all the time. Let's say maybe 2 pips into thrill.
Okay.
Because there is that downtime of selecting powers, coordinating with your team, and then it gets, everything goes to hell when you run to the enemy team and combat
Yeah.
breaks out.
So you'd say it has calm elements, but the focus is on having the thrills.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not a single player game. You need to play with people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I always do that backwards. There we go. All right. It's a pretty fair assessment. Um, what box would you like to talk about next?
Let's go to the bottom left.
All right.
So this, I think, is a tricky one. I think it's a very interesting when we talk about MOBA style games because you have to work with a team. Team play is obviously very important.
Mhm.
But these games always do kind of allow, in some extent, for somebody to be the playmaker. The one who gets the lucky draw where their ult wipes out the enemy team. They're the one who
Yeah.
initiated, or they're the one who could even, pull victory from the jaws of defeat, kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm. I think maybe 3 in co-op, 2 in combat for me.
Okay.
Because again, it is a MOBA, so at the end of the day, one person is not going to win the game for the group, but
Right.
that one highly skilled person can certainly, turn things around or, keep the team going.
Mm-hmm.
And then doesn't seem, at least from where I play, there's a lot in terms of story or world building. I know in our previous cast you talked about how Revn started out as a completely different game, and then you decided to build it like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's
So
my line, Dave.
yeah. Context has definitely not been key to Revn's development. We focused on mechanics. That's been, it's something I say all the time in our dev meetings and when we're talking with new players and everything. It's in my
Mm-hmm.
friends. We talk about the game like, hey, we sat down and we wanted to make a game that had really strong mechanics. We wanted the game to feel good,
Mm-hmm.
to be have an interesting meta and complex like ways to play the game, and that was way more important than telling
Mm-hmm.
a story with the game. It's about how does the game work, how do the numbers crunch, and
Mm-hmm.
how does it feel like on a competitive level, and then we're starting to tell a story around that, right? And so now we're building in the characters in the world, but it's always been taking a back seat to mechanics.
I can hear the like dogs like bark out my window right now. Maybe they're very excited about MOBA shooters.
I don't think your mic's picking up. I can't hear them. So
Oh, that's good.
there they are.
Mechanics.
There they are.
Yeah. If I can keep talking, I can maybe drown them out. I would say mechanics speaking, definitely a 2 for me. I didn't really get a chance to play around with the aligning of skills, upgrading. Like I didn't really realize that was a system until like the second or third match,
Mhm.
and then by then we were already starting to like wrap things up or get into a groove.
Yeah, yeah. I guess, yeah. That's a fair assessment. I'm gonna go through after we're done, and I'll give my ratings, which will probably be very similar to yours.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I'll just. It sounds like you were not at all impressed with our storytelling, which is totally understandable because there's none of it. So the final two boxes, the novelty and the work box
Mm-hmm.
or the skill box. Which one would you like to talk about?
We'll do skill.
All right.
Uh, like work and not work. This is a weird one because at the end of the day, you are repeating gameplay. That's the essence of a competitive game. But it doesn't, at least from what I played and from what like we were talking about, it doesn't seem like it's work focused. Like
Mm-hmm.
yes, you're replaying the game, but you're not really thinking about I need to grind 10 more matches so I can unlock the glowy aesthetic on my gun or things like that.
Right. Right.
But
So, where would you rate it in that regard? Then, like, it does the game, like you said, the game has grinding, but it's not.
I would say maybe just like 1 in work.
Okay.
Um, and maybe 1 or 2 in not work as well, because again, it is so much of a. That's the thing about competitive based games. You're not thinking so much in the long term in a competitive game. You're thinking about what am I doing this match, win
Yeah.
or lose. I'm thinking about what's happening at this very moment, not what I'm doing 15 matches down the line.
Yeah. When you're playing Revn or any other like
Mm-hmm.
competitive game, like you said, yeah, you're at best you're thinking about the next 20 minutes of the match if you're at the beginning of the match,
Mm-hmm.
but you're probably not even thinking about that. You're not thinking about, well, what are we going to do when we're at the end of the match and we're
Yeah.
shooting at the nexus? You're thinking about, okay, what am I doing in the next like 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
What items do I need to buy? Where do I need to go to farm? Okay, is that an enemy? I'm going to go kill him,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's absolutely fair.
Mm-hmm. Skill, I would say. I think at this point, from what I played, at least 2 into
Okay.
skill. There's still the progression system of buying, upgrading your weapons, upgrading your mods. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's still a shooter. You still need to know how to point and click, or
Yep.
aim and click on somebody in order to kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does the game, to you, from what you've seen of it and what you've heard of the design, does the game have elements of less skill, of ways to play the game if you're not good at it?
Well, I know you have that whole system of building or spawning minions and things like that.
Hmm.
So that could be a way for somebody who's not good from the FPS side to kind of contribute.
Hmm.
But I didn't get a chance to do that, so I don't have first-hand knowledge on it.
Okay. That's fair. Saying like, yeah, like maybe you're not good at this part of the game, but there's
Mm-hmm.
sort of a non-combat role you can play and do support.
Yeah.
Um, all right. And finally, the novelty box. Fantasy versus realism, building versus exploring.
Definitely more on fantasy. Like I don't think you have like even like any realistic guns, right? Are they all just
No.
like yeah? So
Yep.
definitely no realism in this one.
Okay.
Uh, Bill, explore at the moment I think would be nothing, just because of the fact that at the moment there's not like there's really nothing more to the game other than the map that you have.
Right.
And building customization is a big point about this, and I know you're going to be working on cosmetics. I would say at least two for right now.
Okay.
I know you're working on doing a lot. Again, from the version that I played,
Mhm.
we will put up all. Well, I think at the end we'll show each one again for everybody
Yeah. Yeah.
to.
We will.
Yeah. Like I don't know again, like from what I played, how extensive the cosmetics and ultimately the customization is going to come in terms of how again like it's that difference between a live service game where they are constantly getting new and new features versus more of a competitive game that again like has like that more of a seasonal or rotation focus.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that was really interesting to hear how you perceive the game. I guess I will now give my thoughts on my own game. And so, um, personally, I would say that building and customization is super important to us.
Hmm.
So I'd give it three. I agree with you. There is like next to no building in the game, or I'm sorry, exploring.
Hmm.
We don't explore the world really. We don't really find out about anything. We're building stuff. But I mean, for me, influencing the world is super important in Revn. You've got you can build fortresses, you customize your characters' appearances and different abilities. That's one of the
Hmm.
biggest things to me, right? I agree with you that it's very fantastical. You can call down laser beams from the sky and got a wrist-mounted flamethrower. It's
Hmm.
a fantasy. I would say that we have realism in that we have guns, and we try to have things that are like we're not
Weapon
entirely
physics
abstract.
in a sense.
Yeah, it's very fantastical, but we are based in a weapon.
Hmm.
Weapons look like things that we understand to be guns. So it's not an entirely abstract game,
Hmm.
right? Um, so moving on from that though to the blue box about you know is it a challenging game? Absolutely, yes. Skill is important. It's we didn't want it to be entirely skill based, but it's
Hmm.
very skill based. uh, I really like what you said about there is a way to play the game with less skill by being good at different things in the game. You can be a support player, you can be more of a builder, but at the end of the day, it's more about being skilled. And work. Yeah, it's not a super grindy game. You can grind for currency and unlocking new stuff, but like that's something more the meta game, and it's not. I feel like why you're playing, right? It's what keeps you hooked once you've played the game, right? You get hooked and you're like, all right, I want to get that new skin, but it's not really like what brings you to it in the first place. Um, and on that note, we've tried to keep the grindiness
Yeah.
to as low as possible, right? It's about coming in, proving you're the best, beating the other team, and doing that over and over again until you find someone who can beat you, and then go home and you feel bad about not being good at video games. That's what I do. Um, so uh, in this box, we're talking about the harmony and the mechanics of the game. Yeah, absolutely, you have to play with your team, right? If you're not playing with your team, you're losing.
Hmm.
And combat is super important in the game. If you're not shooting at things and engaging in combat, you're playing the wrong game. It's a game about conflict and working with your team. Um, Working with your team is more important than the combat, but they're both very important. Mechanics. I mean, I would say that I'm going to be probably a little overly generous in this box, but I'm going to say that hey, mechanics to us super important making the game, right? That was the thing where it's like, all right, we have to have good mechanics, right? We have to have good mechanics. We have to have good team play. We want to have some story. We have story. We're working on it. It's important to us that we have it, but we're not really worried about having the best story. We're not trying to win any writing awards, and I just feel that. So, and finally, in the stimulation box, it's very much a multiplayer game. You have to play with other people. Being with other
Mm-hmm.
people is that's the full experience, right?
Yep.
You're not going to play this by yourself. And I like what you said about it has some calm moments, but it's mainly a thrill based game, right? It's getting those great action moments where you're getting those team kills and saving your base and things like that. It's about the thrills, and has a couple moments of calm, and that's sort of where it lands. So this is how I see my game. I wish I could look back and sort of compare it to what I thought it would be like 3 or 4 years ago. But I do think it'd be pretty similar. So let's sort of see compared to you. I think I'm just being a little more generous than you because
Mm-hmm.
it's my game. But we sort of agreed on what was important.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is, if you're a gamer who enjoys these types of games who have these elements, I can make a compelling argument that you'd be interested in trying my game.
Yeah, like
Um,
this seems like a good chart if you are making some kind of competitive or multiplayer focused kind of game.
mhm.
Where, I mean, the only thing that could probably it could stand a reason to be added in would be lore and story at some point, because like we said, Warframe, like that kind of stuff does attract people. It's not the main
Right.
focus, but it does add to that world.
Right. And it's also interesting to note, I think that, your analysis was someone who's played the game several months
Mm-hmm.
ago. This was your impressions of the current product. And, my graph is like my vision for the product, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously my vision is going to be a little bigger. I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, we're definitely going to be the best at this. We are right now. Um, and yeah, again, the comparison to Warframe and lore in a game that's not about story. Warframe is not a game about story. Overwatch is not a game about story. Um, but both those games have fan bases who are very interested in the lore and the character, and I think that's you know a direction for Revn to grow is to add more world building and characters for people to get invested in, and just have that
Mm-hmm.
as something to get invested in.
Yeah.
Um,
And I also would say that it's also important for like a multiplayer context that you don't want to have a lot of grinding in a competitive based game like this. You don't want the player to feel like, this match doesn't matter. I'm just playing it so I get, my 5,000, my, what's it, like my daily quest for the day, and then I don't want to play the game anymore.
right. East going. Has anyone in my studio made the joke about turning Revn into revenue? No one has made that joke yet. You're the first. Uh, I'm going to take that one back to the team, though. We did have we made a subreddit for the game a few like last week or something. So it's reddit.com/Revn. And when we were making it, Lucio and I, for a few brief moments, considered making it r/evn, so that so that if we look at the URL, it would be Reddit/res/Revn. But we realized that would probably be really, really bad for search engines trying to find
Mm-hmm.
the game.
Yeah.
So we didn't do that, but we highly considered it, and I hope someone else makes that. I hope someone makes like the meme page or something. Like like games at a certain point, if you get big enough, you start getting multiple subreddits of people talking about. All right, let's talk about cosplay for just this game, or just memes related to this game, or you get like memes related to this character related to this game.
You want a
So
fashion Revin to be a thing at some point, right?
right, yeah, yeah, because we have a massive color palette system, and we're trying to add more skins all the time. Um, Absolutely. So I know Oscar wanted to see the Warframe graph that we came up with. So this is the Warframe graph.
Yeah. I
So you
figure
go
like
ahead.
to end to end this episode, like when we do these things, we can just quickly go over like kind of like summarizing our thoughts for each game.
Yeah, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, so with something like with Warframe, it definitely has like going from we'll start from top left to bottom right kind of thing. Huge focus on player customization. That is easily one of the major focal points of the game. You have cosmetic personalization. It's definitely high in fantasy again. We're dodge flipping around everywhere we go. Or at least I was doing that. Just
Yeah,
slide into a flip, and that's your primary form of movement. So it's not is the as we were saying earlier is the complete antithesis in terms of that quadrant to or similar to that in terms of the Division where Division focuses more on realism as a cover-based shooter, but there is some fantasy elements in the form of kind of the future tech in it. If we go to the top right, it is built on grind. I mean, it is a live service game. It's a game that's supposed to be played every day, just like any good free-to-play, any kind of MOBA or again live service game. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that's kind of its focus. It's not a game that you can play, I'm only going to play it two. Ooh. Okay, test. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, you cut out for
Yeah,
just a minute.
headset is still. That's the next thing. I gotta get this headset fixed or get a new one. There you go.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, like you said, it's a game that you play.
mhm,
You play for more than 2 hours. If you've played
yeah,
Warframe for 2 hours, you really haven't played.
yeah, and it's designed again around real world timers as well. So this is
Yeah,
again a game that if you want to make any progress in it, you're going to have to be playing it daily. And that's kind of one of the things that kept me from really getting into it was I don't have the time these days to be playing one game every day. My audience would just probably kill me because they'll be all pissed because I don't have any time for work. I can't say, I'm sorry to make a video today. I had to grind Warframe mats. If we go to bottom right, it is definitely on the thrilling side, but there is downtime in terms of wandering around your spaceship, checking in with your friends, the guild hall, things like that. Still heavy focus on multiplayer, but it does accommodate for some solo play. I don't remember if the boss missions were. I think they were soloable. It was just again on the harder side of doing it. But
right, right.
this is still a game that you want to hang out with your friends or with your guild, go on missions, and it's set up to pretty much get you into multiplayer very quickly.
Right.
And
Yeah,
then,
you don't have to go out looking for people to play with. They'll automatically
and I
match make you with random people like the first time you start playing the game.
and I think
So
that is very important these days for any multiplayer-based game. The days where you expect the player to just kind of, search a servers list for 10, 15 minutes to get a game going, it doesn't work anymore. You want to make it as easy as possible to get into a multiplayer.
yeah,
And then bottom left, again, story, world building, lore. It matters to a certain extent, but it's not the focus of why you play Warframe. It's the icing on the cake, as we described this before.
mhm.
And then again, co op, combat. If you have really good people in your team, you don't need to be skilled at the game to make progress in it. Like I've been carried a few times myself there. And then for the mechanics side, it has some very deep subsystems. Again, the grinding, the crafting, being able to the card system. There's a lot that goes under the surface that people have made use of.
Yeah. I looking at it now, sort of zoomed out. I feel like an argument could be made for having more than just having combat. The
Mm-hmm.
combat in Warframe is good, right? They try to make it good to appeal to. I think if the combat was not good in
Mm-hmm.
Warframe, I know I wouldn't play it.
Yeah.
So seeing that, I'm tempted to make adjustments to the chart. Where whether or not we're allowed to do that after doing this. I'm just gonna go for it. You guys
Uh,
decide. So I'm just gonna kind of expand on their combat
mhm.
and say that they have, if the combat was not as good as it is, people probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's like that's the thing. It's like the mechanics and the combat was not as good as it is. People wouldn't play it for hundreds and even thousands of hours. I've got a friend who's like 5,000 hours.
Yeah, and it's that circular progression loop that the more I build stuff, the more I craft. That in turn gives me more to do in the combat. Doing more in the combat unlocks more loot and more items, which I can then take back to the crafting.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on to the second game that we talked about, which was Hades.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of how we saw it.
Yeah.
It does not have really like building, and it's not realistic. It's a fantasy game about being a Greek demigod
Mm-hmm.
fighting with the help of other Greek gods against mythical monsters in hell, right?
Yeah.
And you're exploring the world because it's a roguelike. It takes some skill, but you can also just fail and fail until you eventually get enough boons to succeed.
Yeah.
Um, it is a game that has no multiplayer. It has a few moments of calm, again, like when you're back in your base and getting ready to make another run. But it's mainly about the thrills of going at it by yourself and just conquering the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, rather escaping from it. Uh, and and finally, like the story is very important, I think, and the mechanic. You don't
Yeah.
really work with anyone else. There's no co-op. You're not working with NPCs or anything. It's a game about exploring the world, hearing the story, and beating bad guys.
Yeah. And the
Um,
combat is, like we said, like it's great, but it's not really the main focus. Like if you're bad at the combat, you can get by with the mechanics, like similar to the Binding of Isaac. That if you get the lucky drops, the best items, even somebody who's not good at the game can completely steamroll over it. But if you are good at the game, then you don't need as much luck in order to beat it.
right, right. Um, and just for fun, let's compare it to Warframe. You can see that they're very very different.
Mm-hmm.
The slightly darker sections are where they overlap. So they sort of overlap on the importance of mechanics in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's also some very different aspects to the games. They appeal to very different people, I think, in that way, with certain things, but also in other ways they appeal to the same people. If you like games with good combat and mechanics with some grinding, you might like both games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you really care about building and exploring? You might not like both games, right?
Yeah.
You might gravitate towards one or the other.
Yep.
And then finally, I don't know if this is probably way too much to try and compare all of those. So let's take Hades out of the equation. So Warframe versus Revn, I think they're very similar.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, seeing as that I played Warframe for years and then I designed Revn. That I would be heavily influenced by it. I'm not gonna hide or deny that fact. Um, we Revn also cares about building things, and mechanics and combat and co-op, working as a team. And it's multiplayer. It's got some skill. Like it's same sort of subset right there.
Yep. And again, that kind of focus on the multiplayer experience on individual plays. The only difference, obviously, is that with Revn, you're not focusing on the grinding aspect of it. And I think that's kind of the difference, again, in that appeal of a multiplayer game with grinding and kind of a live service atmosphere versus a multiplayer game with a competitive focus, and you're not really thinking about, what am I going to unlock 5 weeks from now, playing a game
Right.
like Warframe versus Revn.
Yeah, like that's sort of the difference between a PvP game and a PvE game.
Mm-hmm.
Is PvE you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. There's only so many AI and NPCs that the designer can put into the game, and at a certain point, you're going to see them all.
Mm-hmm.
In a PvP game, every human is unique. You're going to be playing against different people, different strategies every time you boot up the game.
Yep. And I think it is very important to understand, like, again, that appeal of, especially for multiplayer, basically. I mean, this could probably be a podcast in of itself about how to motivate somebody to play in a multiplayer game. Because, as we talk about, if you can't get people invested in a multiplayer game, it doesn't matter if that's the best damn multiplayer system around. It's going to be a dead game, and there's nothing else that you can do at that point.
Right. Oscar in chat had a really interesting point about how PvP progression and grinding can actually introduce unbalance.
Yep.
And I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about grinding in PvP games, and like what would that change in Revn, and how does that look in other games? And the first example that came to my mind was the new Battlefront 2 from 2017, 2018 that DICE made. It was 2017. That game, especially at launch, and it's been memed to death, and I will defend it by saying that they really reworked the game's grinding to the point where it's really not a problem in terms of like getting the big things people were all worked up about a few years ago. But they do have grinding for weapons that I find extremely annoying. For the basic trooper classes, for the characters you spend most of the game playing as, you have to get 50 kills with the basic sniper rifle before you can get the better sniper rifle.
Didn't they do that in a Battlefield as well? That kind of system.
Yeah, it's same developers, so they did that. They did that in Battlefield as well, which I also found kind of annoying in Battlefield. So, and that's a personal preference thing. I don't, some people enjoy grinding. Like for some of my friends who really like Battlefield, like that's why they play Battlefield. It's like, all right, I'm going to use this gun until I can get try this other cool gun, and like that's part of why they keep playing every, while the game first released, they played every day for several hours because they were really interested in grinding through and unlocking all of it. I wasn't. I was just sort of annoyed that someone else had a better gun than me because he started playing 2 days earlier. And this is why this is important to talk about as designers and as players is what type of game experience do we want to have, and what cost does it have? Because for some people, they want to have that experience of unlocking new stuff, but it comes at the cost in a multiplayer setting of someone else doesn't have it. And is that okay? Generally in PvE, it's okay if someone else has a better gun. In PvP, it starts to become a problem, perhaps.
Yeah. And especially if the only way to get that is to spend premium currency or real world money on it. Like, one of the frustrating things about with Mortal Kombat 11 is that there doesn't seem to be any real way to unlock the different characters through the in-game currency. You must spend real money to do that. And in a competitive-based game, it creates that issue that if I want to remain competitively viable, I need to know every one of these characters works. So I'm going to be forced to spend that money to compete.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with MK11, but that's definitely a problem if they're going to lock it like that. That would be, for me as a competitive game designer, I would see that and be like, that's a problem. In Revn, we I guess I have to defend the fact that we do lock gameplay items behind microtransactions, but you also can earn them in game. So we don't completely paywall them. And there is, like you said, you have to be able to, if you really want to be competitive in a game, you have to know how everything works, right? You have to know what you're up against. And we do it very similar to the way that League of Legends handles their characters.
Yeah, the rotation.
Right. So we do rotations every week so people can try things out. And we try to keep that fresh so that, if you're playing the game for a few weeks and you're trying to learn the game before you go into the ranked queue, right? By that point, you hopefully will have rotated through most of the stuff and you'll know how it works. But also, we provide, a training area where everything's unlocked. So you can just go there and try stuff out, right? So if you're just playing by yourself against some target dummies and stuff, you can be like, all right, I see how this ability works, so I will understand when someone uses it against me, this is what it does. So I think having those types of systems in place help mitigate some of the problems and the negative side effects of locking gameplay mechanics behind grinding or behind a paywall. Is at least allowing players to try them out or see how they work and understand them, even if they can't personally use them in a
Yep.
competitive setting. Um, I know other games. I believe League of Legends introduced their Clash tournaments recently, which I find really interesting. I'm really curious to see how they play out. It's basically like a mini ranked ladder that happens over weekends that anyone can like build a
Okay.
team lock into. So the way I understand it is you get a team captain, any player, and you get like four of your friends. So you have a team of 5 players, and you guys all agree that you're going to play, in the next Clash tournament, which is on a weekend. And it can be either Saturday or Sunday or both days. They're each like separate
Mm-hmm.
tournaments. And then you basically lock in to play through a ranked. Uh, I think it's just a single elimination
Hmm.
ladder until there's a winner, right? So, and if you back out, you're penalized, right? So it's you basically commit your group of 5 people against all the other people who've committed, and you get put into a bracket of 8 teams and give yourself a team name. And I think it's really cool. I think it's a really cool idea because it's sort of that experience of being on a pro team, but boiled
With
down to anyone can do this.
and the fact that it's only a 2 day commitment versus months and months of playing.
Right, and I think you can even do it as a 1 day commitment. Like I
Yeah.
think you can do, I think you can lock in for, all right, we're just playing the Saturday tournament, or we're just going to play on Sunday, or we'll play both tournaments, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a really cool system. I'm really curious to see how it plays out, and then maybe we'll do something similar in Revn if it seems to be a successful tournament model. Um, but my point was, I also believe I read, and don't quote me on this, but I think they unlocked all champions for Clash Tournament.
Hmm.
So even if you don't own the champion or the character, you can use it during the tournament. I'm actually going to fact check myself on that.
And
Uh,
while you're doing that, I think that's a very interesting strategy of kind of squared streamlining or simplifying some of the more opaque or hardcore aspects of multiplayer games so that everybody else can make use of it. Kind of like I'm trying to think of some other really good examples of this. Like if somebody could figure out a way to give a player the experience of like a 68-hour long raid, but turn it to maybe a 40-minute to an hour long chunk, so that more people can experience it without again that huge commitment of time, energy, and money.
yeah, I did just look it up, and I was correct. So all the champions are unlocked for the tournament, which is I think completely for competitive integrity.
Yeah.
Um, they also slightly modify the rules, like the health of towers and stuff changes at 60 minutes to make sure that the game ends, and they've got some like special rules in place, which is really cool.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and they also you have to sort of buy into the tournament
Mm.
to keep people from like trolling it. And that's I don't it is you can buy in with the earnable currency or
Oh,
the
okay.
premium currency. So and it's fairly cheap as far as the currency goes. It's 990 blue essence, which is not a lot.
So it's kind of
Uh,
like like the arena tickets in like Hearthstone or something along those
yeah,
lines.
or it's basically the equivalent of $2 of premium currency.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either buy in for $2 of premium currency or like 900 of the earnable currency. And I don't play enough League to tell you how quickly you earn that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't sound outrageous to me personally. And so I think that's also a really interesting thing where they sort of like, hey, you're invested, right? You're not just going to troll the match. You're not just going to go AFK and abandon your team. You've got something on the line here.
Okay. Well, I think with that, we did once again go over our initial time, as we always do for these casts. But I
Yes, we
think
do.
that is a good point to wrap it up. So, for people watching this live or recorded, if there's any games in particular you want us to tackle for our next series or our next podcast on this topic, let us know in the comments below. Like we've said, we're going to shoot to do these at least once a month. We're going to try, schedule issues notwithstanding, try to do this the first Monday of each
Yes.
month. And For people from your group following or coming onto this, if you want to follow me, I am on Twitter at JW Bycer. You can find our Discord and Patreon link down below. These videos will go up probably quicker than some of our normal podcasts because they are a dedicated series, but people who donate to the Patreon do get access to our videos a lot, or get access to them sooner. And for you, Silas, what are the best social media or areas you would like to plug for Revn?
So if you want to check out Revn, find out more about the game I work on, you should go to revngame.com. That's REVN game.com. We're also on Twitter at RevnGame and Instagram at Ambitious Devs. If you're personally interested in hearing my daily ramblings on Twitter and thoughts on game design, I'm at Silas_Tally. And I love talking about game design. So if you ever got things you want to just chat about on Twitter, just at me or DM me or whatever. I love talking about game design theory, and it's always a pleasure to be on this podcast with you, Josh.
Awesome. And for any developers watching this year live record, we are always happy to have new guests on. If you're interested in talking game design, working in game dev, or teaching about it. Silas, and I'm sure my audience well knows that I like to talk about this stuff for long periods of time. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. And very quickly, if people are interested in Revn, any updates regarding the open beta yet?
So we have been in closed alpha for about a year and a half now, and we are gearing up towards an open beta hopefully this summer. I don't have a release date yet, but I can kind of confirm late summer open beta. We are getting ready to do stuff with dedicated servers. We're about to start building those. And actually, just this last week, we introduced bots to the game. So we now have AI that can sort of simulate players and do the same things that players do. So we're able to fill out the matches even when we have just a 5v5 MOBA. So if we have a match where there's 3 versus 3, we now spawn 2 of these bots to sort of fill in the ranks and make the game feel a little bit closer to the true experience. And that's been a huge success for us this last week. And we're really excited to see how those go in the next couple of weeks before we've got some more news, which you can expect another announcement from us in the next couple of weeks. So I would go and hit that follow button on our Twitter account or Instagram, because you'll find out about it then.
Awesome. So with that, we are going to end things for our episode today. Again, Silas, it was a pleasure hanging out with you, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again next month for another topic.
Yes, looking forward to it.
All right. For the people watching this live right now, I will be back later tonight for our regular game stream, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom. Oh, there you go. My headset just went out again. That's a good time for that, of course. But again,
Always.
Thank you for tuning in. Come back for regular discussions on game design here and on game wisdom. Until next time, have a great night.